in on a conversation among academics and all of the trials and tribulations of academics and whether they have classes or whether they don't have classes. Good to see Professor Ferguson again. I think the last time was in Washington, but I'm not absolutely certain. So
I think so.
I assume our intrepid officials have conducted the complete weather report across Canada from Manitoba to Calgary to Ottawa. All we lack is a sports report now. So I apologize for starting a few minutes late, but we had a vote and members are coming in, but we do have a quorum, and so we are prepared to move forward. And so I'm just going to call you in order of the order paper, and starting with Dr. Ferguson, then Mr. Hubert, and then Professor Hubert, and then Dr. Sederman. So in that order, Dr. Ferguson, good to see you again. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. I will be brief and focus my remarks on the threat assessment to North America. I think the first thing to recognize is that the threat assessment really hasn't changed despite the ongoing war in Ukraine. The issues confronting North American defense have been known for some time now. You can date back a decade with the development of long-range cruise missiles, which basically made the North Warning System obsolete. And then since then, roughly since about 5 years ago or so, the development of hypersonic vehicles by the Russians and their deployment poses another significant challenge to North American defense. In simple terms, North American defense faces significant and severe capability gaps and command seams. In capabilities gaps in particular, you confront the problem of long-range cruise missiles, which will be able to launch well over the high Arctic, if not, depending on Russian developments, from Russia itself, long-range ground-launched cruise missiles, which the North Warning System simply cannot deal with. It can pick them up very briefly as they sort of fly over, but there's no capacity to be able to really detect them and track them and vector interceptors to them. Hypersonics pose another very distinct challenge. The North Warning System is not calibrated, nor does it have the power to be able to look up and find these weapons. And the American Ballistic Missile Warning Network, which feeds into the NORAD ballistic missile early warning mission, is calibrated to deal with ballistic missiles, which fly much higher and much faster than hypersonics. So we have two significant gaps in defense. Secondly, in terms of command seams, North America has always been limited in the past to Canada, the US, when we talk about NORAD, North American defense. There are significant problems in that structure, both in terms, particularly in terms of Greenland. Greenland is North America. We have no close, although the US has more closer links than we do, we have none actually. Greenland has always been NATO looking east. In the US Unified Command Plan, it is attached to US European Command, when in fact it should be attached to US Northern Command and NORAD. And this extends also to Iceland. So there are command seam problems, there are capability gap problems, and it becomes a very complicated air defense or aerospace defense environment, not least of all because hypersonics blur the distinction between air and space or ballistic missile defense. And these are big issues that the government of Canada faces, along with our ally to the south, the United States, in coming up with an effective defense capability and command structure to ensure that we can actually detect, deter, defeat, and defend against potential and future threats. Involved here. There's a lot of cost implications involved here, but I just think I'll just leave it there as a basic overview, and in the question question period, I'll happily provide more details about the problems we face.
Thank you very much, Professor Ferguson. Professor Hubert, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to come and share some thoughts with the committee and the good work that you're doing. I have two major focuses within my introductory comments. The first is, of course, the challenges that Canada has and has traditionally faced in terms of coming to regards to its threat assessment and its ability. And the second is a focus on what are those threats as they develop against Canada. The first issue in terms of dealing and trying to come to terms with the threats and coming up with the ability to then operationalize it are threefold, in my view. The first one is, of course, is the absolute overshadowing of the United States over Canadian assessments of threat. One of the issues dating all the way back to the beginnings of the First World War, Second World War, is the fact that ultimately the United States will ensure that any safety of North America is, of course, its top priority. And as a result, it has, to a certain degree, confounded Canadian abilities or even willingness to engage upon a threat assessment that is independent outside of an allied framework. That is, of course, both good and bad in terms of how we try to go forward into this future. The second element, of course, that challenges our threat assessment is that out of all of the allied countries, Canada has one of the most highly politicized procurement process. As a result, there has been an ongoing challenge in terms of coming to an understanding of the threat that we face and being able to match together the necessary tools that are required to meet it. Because the Americans will ultimately be there to protect for any types of threat assessment, there, of course, is a certain almost perception of discretionary funding, which, of course, has been one of the major challenges that Canada has faced in terms of responding to the type of dangers that Dr. Ferguson has just referred to. The third aspect is that these two realities have created a strategic culture within Canada where we've become very good at the tactical level in terms of knowing how to be interoperable with our allies, how to respond with the maximum buying with the minimum expenditures. We do an outstanding job. And Canadian leadership has demonstrated in Operation Reassurance talks to this testament. The challenge that we have in terms of, however, is our ability from a strategic perspective of being able to understand the threat from a purely Canadian context. Of course, the reality is many will contend that we do not have to ever do that, that it is only in the context of a North American and Western European appreciation. In terms of understanding the changing threat environment, this is reflected upon a somewhat late response to a very changing, rapidly international system. As Dr. Ferguson said, and I agree, the challenges that Canada is facing have been well known and developing for quite some time. My time period would go slightly different. I would suggest that really what we start seeing is with the arrival of Putin as president of the Russian Federation, that we saw both an intent and a desire to once again return Russia as a great power. And he began a series of processes that probably was not fully understood within the Canadian context. There was an effort to maintain dialogue on the Arctic cooperation side, of course, within the context of Arctic exceptionalism, as it's referred to. But even more problematic, there was a basic approach of more or less downplaying the Russian statements and actions. They had difficulties in some of their initial moves to procurement, but many of these weapon systems that Dr. Ferguson refers to, of course, did not simply appear in 2022. And we can trace the initiations of them to the period roughly between 2005 to 2010. And so once again, giving us warning in terms of specifically on the hypersonics and also underwater autonomous vehicles and other types of delivery systems that are in fact a direct threat. These started becoming known as early as the 2010s. We also see, of course, the use of force to redraw the maps of Europe. Chechnya probably gives us the first indication of the Russian way of war. The war in Georgia clearly indicated that the ability of states to choose to join NATO was no longer going to be allowed in terms of any neighboring state to Russia. And ultimately, the beginning of the Ukrainian war in 2014 illustrated this very clearly. So once again, the threat to Canada in the context of both collective security and in regards to its own northern security probably were telegraphed to us as early as 2012, 2013. but now is the time that we're starting to really give full attention to it. I'll conclude by also observing that we have great difficulty in trying to come to terms with what threat the changing element of China represents. There are, of course, those that do not see China as a direct military threat, perhaps economic threat, perhaps something in between, a hybrid threat. And this is, of course, something that we are going to have to be paying greater attention to as the international system further resets itself after the events of the Ukrainian war. I'll leave on this point and be happy to take any questions on this.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Dr. Seidman, please.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity to It sounds strange at this time when much of the focus of the world, including Canadian leadership, is on the war between Russia and Ukraine.
La menace la plus importante sont les changements climatiques et des abus de pouvoir. Dans cette déclaration, j'aborderai brièvement les menaces auxquelles nous sommes confrontés, la façon dont le ministère et les FAC sont préparés. Je m'appuie sur mon expertise en matière de relations civilo-militaires, mon travail d'universitaire.
English into French. And I don't know whether we're getting French into English.
Okay.
Okay. Do you want to start again?
You want me to start again?
Yeah, go back to the beginning. I apologize, but we sometimes
okay.
Get our wires crossed around here. Okay.
Well, my first 10 years in Canada, I did live in Montreal, but my French never really got that well. So anyway, thank you for this opportunity to speak. It may sound strange at this time where the focus of much of the world, including Canadian leadership, is on the war between Russia and Ukraine. But the most important threats facing Canada and the Canadian Armed Forces are climate change and its own abuse of power crisis. In this statement, I'll briefly address the threats that we are facing and how well D&D and CAF are preparing for dealing with these threats. I come at this based on my expertise on civil military relations, my work as a scholar of international relations, my interactions with various elements of the defense and security community based on my role as a director of the Canadian Defense and Security Network. I have two big caveats to start with is I am not an expert on any particular military technology, nor Zoom apparently. So my opinions about procurement are less well-informed than my views on the CAF and the crisis it's been undergoing for years. Second, contrary to my two colleagues here, I am what I would call an Arctic skeptic. If the Russians can't provide logistics for a conventional military campaign next door, I can't see how they're a huge threat to the North. We do need to invest in modernizing our warning technology in the North. But the key is this requires great consultation with the people who live there. Our best protection against Northern threats is a better relationship and more investment in the people who live there. The Canadian Ranger system works precisely because of the local trust and buy-in. Back to my main topic. People used to talk about climate change in abstract terms. This fall, storms and floods isolated Vancouver and severed Canada's connection to the Pacific more effectively than a Russian or Chinese first strike might. Before the pandemic, General Eyre, when he was Army Chief of Staff, noted that the assistance to civil authorities was increasing in intensity and in frequency. The pandemic itself, where more Canadian civilians died than in any attack or war, was yet another emergency requiring much CAF effort. Yet we continue to see domestic operations as an afterthought. It's always mentioned as a priority, but always the least of priorities. This has to change. It has to become a more important priority for the Canadian Armed Forces. The second threat is the CAF itself. Sexual misconduct is just one part of the larger abuse of power crisis. We've seen numerous generals and admirals lose their positions because of poor behavior, and this creates a chilling effect that is not new. Soldiers, sailors, and aviators have long known that the folks at the top do not want to hear bad news and do not respond to it well. Meanwhile, promotions has been an old boys club where the CDS gets to pick his command staff with little oversight. And there's many stories of resentment and feuds between the two towers, between D&D and CAF, that are just getting out now, but it's long been the case. Civilians who are supposed to be responsible for civilian control of the military have largely abdicated their responsibilities. Given this environment, plus a good job market, we should not be surprised that people do not want to join or stay in the CAF. General Eyre has referred to this using the phrase existential crisis to describe the challenges CAF faces, as we are something like 10,000 short of our recruitment and retention goals. That's more than 10%. It's closer to 16%. Perhaps people choose not to join because of fear they will be abused. People may leave because of such abuse. They certainly fear reporting their abuse through the chain of command. Yet we had in place a minister in a CDS for several years who did nothing or little or worse to change things. Indeed, the CDS picked as a head of personnel a man who had a nickname earned from his successful efforts to escape responsibility, the Mulligan Man. The good news is we have a new minister who is much better equipped and much more serious about making these changes. So far, the CAF talks a good game of changing its culture, but one of the most serious challenges is this: will the CAF accept serious civilian control of the military? The minister's job is more than just picking the CDS. She understands that her role is more than that, and she understands that's far better than her predecessor. I'm not sure the mid-level officers of the CAF do. General Eyre and General Minister Anand have started the process of making serious reforms, but they need to be institutionalized, and we need to learn from past failures. I have a few suggestions as the committee goes forward. You should take a closer look at the National Defense Act and consider whether it provides adequate authorities and tools. Does the deputy minister have the tools needed to make sure the people under them can do their jobs? I suggest two potential changes. Apply a similar but stronger restriction than the United States has. In the United States, they're not supposed to have a recently retired senior military person as Secretary of Defense. They've waived that twice in recent years. Our experience, liberal and conservative, where senior military officers became ministers of national defense, have been predictably bad. They were too close in mindset and in networks to have adequate distance to be sufficiently critical. Similarly, the United States and most other democracies have regular reviews, quadrennial reviews every 4 years. Canada should as well. We need to adapt. We need to have benchmarks that we regularly evaluate. Much has changed since the last defense review. This would also build up D&D's muscles and habits for regular evaluation. I mentioned the recruitment crisis. I have one other suggestion for that, which is have military service as a pathway to citizenship. The U.S. has long offered citizenship to people elsewhere who then become citizens along the way. This will not be easy, but it will help to develop a wider and deeper and more diverse pool of recruits. People will push back and say that security clearances get in the way, but this is something the U.S. has managed to finesse. Just because it's hard doesn't mean we shouldn't try to do these things. We can do it too. The very least we can do is reduce the obstacles to immigrants already living here, as we need their skills, their diverse perspectives, and their energy. With populations of usual pools of recruits declining, we need to be more imaginative and more determined. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we'll go to our 6-minute round, starting with Madame Carrie Lynn Finley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. Very informative. Professor, I don't know if it's Hubert or Hubert, but...
It's Hubert.
Hubert, you're in Alberta, so I should have guessed that. You said that Canada has one of the most highly politicized procurement systems. I'm wondering if you could give us a little more, flesh that out a little more. Who are you comparing us to, and what do you mean by that?
Well, just to give you a direct example, just look in terms of the issue of the replacement of a fighter aircraft. If we go to Finland, Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands or Britain, they tend to have a process that does contain politics. None of the Western countries don't. Let's be very clear on that. But they are able to compact the decision-making process by which they achieve that decision. And so we see a country such as Finland that has always traditionally gone for supporting its Swedish friend and neighbor. And of course, within a 2-year period, as it feels more threatened, it was able to make the decision on the F-35. We can also look at the Australians, who have all sorts of difficulties in terms of trying to get some of their systems working and up. But once again, there has been a more or less bipartisan approach to how they approach the overall decisions. We see this with Japan in terms of the maintenance of their naval capabilities. There is a multi-party acceptance in terms of the major systems that go ahead. In other words, these systems, these procedures that the Americans, the British, the Japanese and Australians have are by no means perfect, but they are able to achieve a speed of decision that Canada simply hasn't been able to equal. And once again, I would contend it's a bit of a sense of that the threat is going to be covered by someone else.
Thank you. Professor Dr. Ferguson, how do you view China's recent fractional orbit bombardment system test coming from the south? And is NORAD prepared to deal with such a threat?
Basically, no. There was developments in the 1960s. The Soviet Union tested a fractional orbital bombardment system, but they gave it up. This is a potential threat, and it's important for Canada on the North Warning System, that northern line of radars. And we have yet to get our minds around that North America is a 360-degree continent that needs to be defended. Now, in the NORAD relationship with the United States, we sort of pass this on to the Americans. This is their problem, and they need to develop more advanced radars, which I think, and sensor systems, which I think they're about to do. But at the end of the day, I don't see the test as anything really significant in terms of Chinese intent and capabilities. If you look at Chinese military doctrine, Chinese military thinking, their strategic political overview, they're primarily concerned with what the U.S. has labeled area. Let's see if I can remember this: access denial and area access and area denial capabilities. They're regionally focused right now. They're developing long-range capabilities to be able to threaten North America, and they can, of course, with their land-based ICBM fleet and growing SLBM capability. But by and large, the Chinese, for the time being, are more a regional problem of the Asia Pacific than they are a threat to North America.
Professor, I'd also like to ask you, do you believe that Russia or China or North Korea, for that matter, differentiates between a missile strike on Canada and a missile strike on the United States?
No. Because of and demographic reality, that Canadian cities are located close to the border to American cities, issues about the accuracy and the guidance systems of potential threatening long-range ICBM capabilities, the fact that they do understand very clearly that we are economically integrated. They see this, as far as I'm concerned, as one target set. Now, what's their specific priorities, threatening, or that's difficult for us to know.
Thank you, Professor.
Pardon me?
Sorry, we're losing the connection with you a little bit there. I thought you'd finish. Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Basically, this idea that somehow everyone separates Canada from the United States is a Canadian myth for political purposes. We are one target area, and it's confirmed by our close relationship with the United States.
This is a question perhaps for Professor Hubert again. How do you think that Russia and China view Canada's Arctic and the Northwest Passage in strategic terms?
Well, in strategic terms, we have to be careful because there's a bit of a tendency to say that the sovereignty issue surrounding the Northwest Passage is a security issue that somehow the Chinese and the Russians may want to take advantage. The Russians actually have a position that's quite similar to Canada in terms of their own Northern Sea route in Northeast Passage. It's more of the security issue that we have to be more concerned about. Now, at this point in time, one has to wonder whether or not the Russians in particular see the Canadian efforts to not modernize to the same degree that we said that we were going to in 2017. And also, I would add that our Northern European allies have been quite active in modernizing their surveillance and reactive forces since 2016, that whether or not we are seen as a weak link. Now, a weak link to what always becomes the question. And so, therefore, in that context, the answer to your question is we don't know the thinking in terms of what Putin means. The danger that we face is, remember that Putin suggested the possibility of using tactical nuclear weapons when the crisis began in the second phase of the Ukrainian war. And he's had a long-term policy for at least a year and a half. It's called escalate to de-escalate. We're not quite sure what that means, but whether or not the demonstration of being able to show Canadian weakness or not, whether or not that figures out, quite frankly, we don't know. But that does remain a possibility. For the Chinese, the Chinese are just a nuisance in the Arctic. Okay, sorry.
Thank you.
Mr. Fisher, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all our panelists today for sharing your high level of expertise. I think I'll start with Dr. Ferguson, and if there's time, maybe go to Dr. Hubert. Last year, the U.S. and Canada issued a joint statement on NORAD modernization, and they outlined 4 priority areas for investment. So situational awareness, modernized command and control systems and capabilities to deter and defeat evolving aerospace threats to North America, and research and development. So I kind of asked this question in a previous incarnation of the Defense Committee, but in terms of capability, what are the most important investments that we could make today in light of what's going on today for our future? I'll start with Dr. Ferguson and then go to Dr. Hubert.
The most important investments at the moment is in and it's not, as I said, simply the North Warning System or replacing it with another series of ground-based radar systems. The current discussions is potentially focused upon over the horizon.
Excuse me, James. You said the most important investment is, and then you cut out, everyone went, what did he just say? So if you could just repeat yourself there.
The most important and pressing requirement right now is in sensor systems, and not simply in terms of replacing the ground-based North Warning System and the current preferences towards over-the-horizon backscatter radars, but integrating both ground-based replacements as well as air-based, whether you think in terms of the possible acquisition of AWACS systems, the use of possibly high-altitude tethered balloons, and space-based systems, not just for the northern part, the Arctic part of the threat assessment, but also for 360 degrees. That's where the priority has to be applied. And I recognize that some of the technologies that is being looked at and why this has been a slow process are still in the R&D stage. But that's the key thing, because if you can't detect it, you can't identify it, you can't track it, and you can vector interceptor capabilities to the target, then all the interceptors in the world are going to do you no good. Hello?
Hi, can I come in? Jim's absolutely right in terms of the sensors, but I'd like to add two things that Canada will have to be facing. And it goes back to the issue about the Chinese tests as well. One, we are, of course, talking of the modernization of NORAD in terms of the North Warning System, and that, of course, becomes part of it. The over-the-horizon radars are another part, but we are going to also have to be looking in terms of space-based assets for determination, particularly given the speeds and the stealth capabilities of some of the Russian cruise missiles, particularly the Kazal missile. We are also going to have to look at the role that NORAD, of course, took on in 2005, 2006, which is, of course, the underwater detection site. Just prior to the resumption of the Ukrainian war, we, of course, had the Russians demonstrate that they can, in fact, have the capabilities of cutting undersea cables. We saw this being cut between Svalbard and the mainland Norway. And they have new weapon systems, the Poseidon weapon system, for example, other autonomous underwater vehicles that are, of course, have the capability of coming closer to Canadian soil or North American soil, for that matter, going back to Jim's point of the 360 threat, which, of course, then, given the type of cruise missile technology that they're having, will present a growing threat to Canadian territory. And this is where, going back to the question on the Northwest Passage, the approach of these new submarine systems are really what are going to be the technical aspect of the threat as it grows going into the future.
Thank you. How does the nature of a given U.S. presidential administration influence Canada's decisions on continental defense? Historically, has there been more, and I'll stick with you, Professor Hubert, historically, has there been more or less cooperation under certain circumstances?
Well, this is part of the saving grace. When we look historically at that relationship, because of the strength that has been developed of those below the political level. In other words, there tends to be a political acceptability that North America has to be defended as a unity. But what has been the true strength of the NORAD agreement and North American cooperation overall is that you've created this very deep web of cooperation amongst the Canadian and American military decision makers. And so generally speaking, you will see that level of cooperation going. The problem comes in is whether or not you have an understanding in the context of what type of funds, what type of necessity have to come in. And that's where we start seeing a bit of a differential. But once again, there is a unity in my assessment between both Democratic and Republican presidents in terms of what they see as necessary. The Americans lost a little bit of attention on the North American defense when they were, of course, engaged in the Afghanistan and the Iraq war. But I think that as we saw from a series of policies and strategies released by every single branch of the American forces personnel of a Northern strategy, they get it in terms of how they need to cooperate with Canada.
Madame Normandine, 6 minutes.
I have a question, especially on supply. Professor Hubert and Professor Ferguson, a very concrete example of supply or procurement. The forces are not able to provide boots to the soldiers, and they have to buy them themselves and be reimbursed. So you can imagine that we lose efficiency through group purchasing. And the minister is about to announce an increase in the defense budget and possibly exceed 2% that we committed towards NATO. I would like to hear you on that. Is it the only solution to increase the budget, or is it more a question of how much, or should it also be a question of how?
Shall I go first?
Go ahead, Jim. Age before beauty.
It's not really a question of increasing the defense budget per se. The question is how much over what period of time, and particularly dedicated to what acquisitions, independent of operations and maintenance, and independent, as Professor Sederman has pointed out, to the problems of recruitment. If you want to punch this money into or funnel it into expanding the Canadian Armed Forces, recruitment intention is a big problem, and you're probably in a real difficulty. If it's going to go into certain capital investments, new ones outside of what was committed in 2017 and 2018, we don't know where they would go. Certainly in 2017, with Strong, Secure, and Engage, North American defense modernization, NORAD modernization is emphasized, but specifically what that entails in terms of thinking about not just sensors, about shooters or interceptors, but command and control arrangements, infrastructure. This is a really big picture. And it's hard to know what we should do. It's easy. And I believe the Germans increase their defense budget over some period of time by $110 billion US. Well, that's great. And that's vitally needed both for Germany and, in our case, how much the government says it's going to invest. But unless we know where they're going to invest, that becomes a different problem, which raises the question, which this government doesn't want to do, no governments want to do once they do defense once, is a need for a defense review. It's very clear in my mind that what was committed in 2017, in the absence of any funding commitment to NORAD modernization and North American defense modernization, that's the key area you want to go, or we should go. Whether that's the case, I think it's important that the government makes this clear. And that means something in the policy world has to be done before we simply say there's money. And remember, national defense over the past many years, I think in every year that I can remember, continues to give back money to the central agencies. I believe, and I might be wrong about the number, but I think last year it was $1.1 billion were returned. Well, that's a problem. You can commit money, but the question is, where do you spend it for what ends? And that's an open question still to this day in Canada.
And let's recognize that the 2% increase when it was created by NATO is a political target. Once again, what we're really talking about is what is the need for the effect of the Canadian forces going into this new environment. And it really comes down to the ability to deter growing aggressor states and to be able to fight in a collective security environment should that deterrence break down. When we went in the immediate post-Cold War period, we of course went through what many democratic countries saw as sort of the ability to save money on defense because there wasn't a fear that we had to deter anyone and we weren't going to be called upon to fight. Now that has obviously changed since at least 2014, I would argue 2008. And so the question is, okay, 2% sounds good in terms of making a commitment, but it's really getting to that capability. Parts of the stuff that Dr. Ferguson was talking about in terms of having the types of forces that you will be able to recruit, bring in, and actually be able to give effect to it. Now, it really gets to the heart of what you're asking, and that is that we need to have an ability to go beyond just simply saying, okay, 2%, 1.9, those are numbers, they don't mean anything. But if you have a strategic knowledge within the ongoing ability at the highest levels to understand the types of threats that we are responding to and to be able to respond nimbly, that in many ways actually goes further than just setting artificial numbers in terms of what you're going. The one aspect that we haven't talked about that we need to bring in is, of course, that Canada also has to incorporate with this and increasing in its ability to have intelligence beyond sensors, beyond detecting the weapon systems. Because we see with the types of warfare that both China and Russia are increasingly relying on, the cyber warfare, the hybrid warfare, the fears that the Russians were involved in Brexit, in the US election, in the Spanish secessionist movements, means that that has to be incorporated in terms of any of our responses. It may seem relatively smaller amounts, but it's something that we probably haven't given enough, but it means that overall picture of how we then respond and think and react. And then, of course, you figure out what the monies flow from that basis.
I would just jump in and say that we also have to think a little bit more about how we do our procurement, because it's been often seen as a jobs program for electoral political benefit as opposed to what is best for what we need. So, for instance, we're seeing in Ukraine a variety of defense systems that are working really well, but we don't make them. Should we build our own anti-tank weapons when there are very good ones out there? Should we build our own anti-aircraft weapons when there are very good ones out there? We need to be a little more realistic about what our own defense industry can do and what it should do. And this leads to a challenge that we've had in our country, which is we feel once we start building up a defense industry that they must be kept busy with a variety of projects like, well, we need to sell labs to Saudi Arabia. So if we think about our defense industry for a minute, we need to think about whether it makes sense for us to have domestic producers of all this stuff, because it puts us in a difficult position of trying to find ways to keep them busy in between our own major projects.
Okay,
so we need to think a little bit more about buying from other folks.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. I'm sure Ms. Matheson has some idea about labs to Saudi Arabia. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to ask Dr. Sederman, first off, in terms of, like you had said in your opening that you are an Arctic skeptic, using the example of that military failure that we have seen in the Ukraine from Russia. Can you elaborate on that a bit more, and what challenges you see that Arctic would face in terms of, or Russia would face in an Arctic invasion?
I've had experts within the military and elsewhere tell me that the problem of a Russian, Russia seizing a few islands of ours, it would not be so much of us having to reclaim those islands, but more of rescuing the Russians who are there. It's the distances that they would have to go and through the weather they'd have to go to sustain forces up there. I think the two professors have identified the real threat to the Arctic, which is these missiles. It's not the random Chinese intelligence ship. It's not a real threat to them seizing territory. And we must remember that most of the Russian investment is on protecting their Arctic rather than jumping across to our side of the Arctic. It's just a very expensive place. There's a reason why we haven't spent as much money as we would like in the north, because once we get started thinking about these things, they become very, very expensive very, very quickly. And as expensive it is for us, it's expensive for the Russians. So they are worried about having this back door that has long been secure, but is being now more open thanks to climate change. They're worried about protecting that more than they are about poaching our side of the Arctic. They talk a good game about it, but that's not really a major threat to us. Again, their procurement systems we've learned are highly corrupt. They can't maintain tires for their truck system. one speculation about why they're not using their Air Force as much as we thought they would in this war is that the logistics of the supplying the planes with parts may be bad. They may not have been flying as many training sessions because the line that they use is that the second currency of the Russian military is fuel, that they use fuel that they get that's supposed to be used for training and operations and use that to buy other things or to enrich themselves. And so they're not really that capable at jumping across the Arctic and sustaining that for any length of period of time. The missile threat is real, but the conventional threat is not so much.
In terms of that large expenditure in the Arctic, there's been a lot of conversations about just plain infrastructure and the investments in terms of infrastructure in the Arctic. Of course, and I've heard different phrases used. Military folks are talking about partnerships with Indigenous folks. We've also heard about the difference between that and Indigenous-led projects. Could you expand maybe on some of the problems that we see going forward in terms of, or what the government needs to do in terms of that infrastructure investment and how we do that together with Indigenous-led in an Indigenous-led way?
I think that's a terrific question, and I don't really have the expertise to answer it. I think you should call Whitney Lachenbauer to talk about that. He has a much better understanding of the work between the Canadian Armed Forces and the people of the North. I think we definitely need to invest in our infrastructure up there. Again, it's incredibly expensive, and so the choices we make are going to be, really long-term, careful ones, and we should definitely involve the people of the North. Whether they lead or we partner, that's a distinction I'm not really that well equipped to address.
Okay.
If I might just add to that, you may be aware that, but roughly a month ago, the government of Canada, National Defence, agreed to a contract with the Inuit Development Corporation, in which they will now sustain and maintain not only the North Warning System until it's replaced, but also the forward operating locations. Clearly, with the extension of the Canadian Air Defence Identification Zone, in terms of a replacement of a ground-based radar net, as well as potentially looking further north for forward operating locations, there are going to be significant opportunities to partner with Inuit companies, Indigenous companies in the North, in the Arctic. And I think this will be an important key decision if we think in terms of the procurement world that will drive how this plays itself out. So there are increasing opportunities. If I could remember exactly, I recall back, this would go back to 2014, an interesting quote from an Inuit leader who talked about the valuable role they have and how important they see in cooperating with national defense and the Canadian forces in terms of the Arctic. So this is, and remember, when we talk about national interests, NORAD modernization is not really simply just military and defense. It spills over into civilian infrastructure and development. And that's an important dual benefit, if you will, for what's going on. Although the Canadian government, and this is something of a concern in my mind, we tend to stovepipe these things. Defense does this, transport does that, health does this. But when you think about, particularly about communications issues, expanding better airfields, et cetera, these are all going to be importantly done in the context of cooperation with the Inuit communities and their business ventures in the North.
We have completed the first round. The second round is 25 minutes of questions, and we have 20 minutes. So I'm going to have to cut back every questioner by a minute, starting with Ms. Gallant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my first question would go to Mr. Ferguson. He was touching on infrastructure and how we have to integrate all the different areas. For example, we have Canadians exposed, their industrial control systems exposed. And Shodan, for example, is a search engine for the Internet of Things. It scans the Internet for any connected devices, including the industrial control systems, which include chemical facilities, traffic control systems, gas stations, oil rigs, wind turbines, power plants, water pumps, wastewater systems, cargo ships. And it looks for any of the exposures, such as a system online, and what it will do is list what these weaknesses are where they can be exposed. How should Canada build in a capability from a defense perspective, given all these different infrastructure systems that we have to integrate?
Well, this is a little out of my area expertise, but I would answer it this way. I'm not sure if I would label this a defense problem that needs in which national defense and NORAD, for example, has always thought that it should have a lead role in North American cyber defense or cyber security. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think that the issue becomes when you have this mix of their defense, but those are largely closed or isolated systems. But when you have a mixture of public and private systems involved here, how do you coordinate this? How do you get everyone to sing from the same song sheet? And that's a problem of the way we've organized government over the past, at least in my view. And at the end of the day, should be a lead for public safety. That's where this key element belongs, not with defense, but with public safety. And they need to be able to do more than simply a coordinating function, although that's very important. But I think we have to be careful when we have government structured as militaries are structures on terms of silos that tend to problematically not be able to talk to each other and don't want to talk to each other. How do you eliminate those barriers? And I think it's something important for the government of Canada to take a very close look at. The program you're talking about is a good initial step forward, but we've got to go proceed further on that than we are right now.
Okay, so the challenge is that the Canadian defense system, the different bases, they all use these civilian infrastructure systems, so they're connected to it, and thereby by extension is exposed as well as the civilian structure. So with China, we not only have the intellectual property theft, but now we have the weaponization of data. They've got mass surveillance of Canadians as well as their own citizens, and are using it as hybrid warfare. How should we defend against that, especially from a national defense perspective? Because it all does tie together.
Well, it does tie together, but you've got to. Well, very quick, it does tie together, but who's going to take the lead on this? That's the key question here.
Madam Lambropoulos, 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to all of our witnesses for being here with us to answer some of our questions today. My first question is going to go to Mr. Hubert. You spoke a little bit about Canada not necessarily being good at understanding the threat from a purely Canadian context. But Mr. Ferguson and yourself have both said that if there were a target, it would be targeted towards North America as one and not as two separate entities. Can you go a little bit further into detail? I know that my colleague asked a similar question, Mr. Fisher, but I'd like for you to possibly go into a little bit more detail on why we need it from a purely Canadian context and what we could do in order to get that information.
Well, there's two major reasons why we have to understand it from a Canadian context. The first one is, of course, to ensure that we are, in fact, getting the maximum out of Americans. We cannot appear to the Americans as a free rider. I think that during the Trump administration, we started having a few hints that, in fact, the special status, where it's automatically assumed that the Americans understood that there was a special relationship with Canada, and therefore we could probably pick and choose to a greater discretion than perhaps the international environment called for, could become problematic moving into the future, that we are seen separate. So therefore, we have to understand, to be able to play our role with the Americans in a proper context, to be able to respond in this ability. The other issue, of course, going forward is that there may in fact be situations related to national security or a hybrid of national security that do not entail American interests that we still have to respond to. Now, we started getting a bit of a flavor of it, of course, dealing with the two Michaels and having to respond from a foreign policy perspective in terms of that response. But most observers, of course, have pointed out that the American support of us in that context may have not always been necessarily in lockstep. And so therefore it is indeed possible. And it gets back to the question that was, or the points that were raised earlier in terms of some of these cyber threats. There is the possibility that Russia, China may in fact utilize a form of attacking Canada from a cyber warfare perspective to basically show the Americans what is in fact is possible and therefore have a deterrent effect. Now, once again, that gets to public safety, it gets to the ability, but it follows Dr. Ferguson's point in terms of the need to be able to respond. The bottom line here is that we do need to understand the threats. We do need to be able to play our role with our alliance system, and we can only do so by having a Canadian understanding as we move forward.
Thank you, thank you very much, Mr. Hubert. Mr. Ferguson, I had questions about whether or not we would be able to, I know that Minister Anand is going to soon be talking about how to better identify hypersonics and detect them. I wanted to ask you a little bit about that, but I'm going to skip it and go to Mr. Seidman and ask about something that is very top of mind for me in terms of national defense and in terms of the CFA, the Canadian Armed Forces, the CAF. You said that there are a couple of tools that we would be able to use, or that the Deputy Minister should be able to use if we were to have an actual effect and change the way that the CAF works. And you mentioned a couple of things that are used in the United States. I'd like for you to go a little bit more into detail about those as well so that we can see how we can use them in Canada too.
Sure, thank you. I think the first thing is that we can keep in mind that we ought to have leadership within DND that is not retired military people. We need to have a distinct perspective from military people. And that wasn't just a Minister of Defense problem, it was also potentially a DND challenge about how many people within DND are former retired people. Given that the people who've risen to the top of the military of the past generation have a lot of problems, it might be that we look elsewhere for leadership within D&D. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we need to think about what tools the Deputy Minister has. So Jody Thomas claimed that when she asked to help John Vance on dealing with the Deschamps report, he told her to stay out of it. And this suggests a real problem within Canadian civil relations where the civilians are told to keep out of it, that the military should just have control over these processes. And we've seen where that has led us. And so I do, as I understand it, we do have the Accountability Act, which that has to deal with money. The CAF to go back and look to the Deputy Minister for oversight or approval. And so I think that is one tool that can be used to make sure the military does heed civilian control. Pretty much every military and every.
We're going to have to leave it there. I apologize again.
Sure.
Madame Normandine, 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much. Professor Hubert, you mentioned in your presentation that the U.S. has a history of taking role at the forefront in defense, and they have a capacity for defense of Canada, but they're the ones who take the first steps or the initiative, but it's a good thing and a bad thing at the same time. I'd like to hear from you why it's a bad thing from what you didn't explain.
Well, the biggest negative part of the Americans taking steps sometimes without our due consideration is, of course, does it always follow with Canadian interest in terms of some of the different defense expenditures, some of the defense expenditures that they in fact have gotten? I'll give you one example, of course, and that is, of course, the American move for an anti-ballistic missile capability. As we go into that, we've seen politically within Canada, we have had a series of debates in terms of whether or not that is, in fact, the way to go ahead when it comes to the challenges facing the overall strategic balance. In other words, if you have a defensive system, do you undermine nuclear deterrence? Now, as it turns out, everybody is developing their own ABM systems, and that debate becomes relatively mute. But in the context of the time, particularly going back to the 80s and 90s, Canada, of course, was just a basic passive participant in terms of how that was going to be playing out. And that probably stands out as the best example where Canadian interests may or may not, but we didn't seem to really have a position that the Americans were in fact willing to follow.
And Madame Matson, 1 minute, please.
Dr. Siedemann, to go back to what you were saying in terms of that oversight and the accountability required within DND and the CAF. I have spoken to the Ombudsman recently, and we were talking about his ability to provide that additional oversight and accountability. Would you agree that instead of maybe having to report to the minister, to the deputy minister, that he would benefit greatly, and the DND, the CAF would benefit greatly from him reporting directly to Parliament?
I'm of mixed minds on this. I understand that that it makes sense to have more independence for whoever is doing the reporting on the military, whether it's an ombudsman or inspector general. The challenge is that in the past, the Parliament has not been the best place to put these people because the Parliament has helped to politicize these things in a way where the reporting is not really focused on improving the CAF, but it ends up being mostly about how best to corner the Minister of National Defense. What is surprising to me in all my careers, I now really focus on personalities, and I think we're in a much better shape having somebody like Anand in this position where she would treat more seriously the complaints of the Ombudsman. But I do think we need to reform the Ombudsman office so they have more independence over their travel budget, over their expenditures, so that way they can do their job without being micromanaged by anybody else who doesn't want to get bad news.
Mr. Motz, 4 minutes.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. Professor Ferguson, I'm going to go to you with this one. I'm going to have you recall your memory. You were before this committee in 2014, and you were quoted as saying, the defense of North America is not just about air, land, seas, space, and cyber domains. You said it's about defense industrial preparedness, defense technology, and research and development. So, Professor Ferguson, over the last 8 years, looking at our Canadian defense industrial preparedness, defense technology, research and development, how have we done? Give us a grade and maybe some thoughts to expand upon that grade.
A grade? That's a tough question
goodness.
to answer. A grade.
Yeah.
My answer is we, by and large, have been marching in place. There have been increased emphasis, investment, particularly in DRDC. For example, they've gotten more money to deal with developing research and development technologies for NORAD modernization. I take to the point, and I agree with Dr. Siedemann about the problems of Canadianization, industrial development, etc. I've always believed that in part of recognizing, and this is where I differ with my colleague, Dr. Hubert, recognizing that our defense is indivisible from the United States, which in turn is indivisible from our allies in many ways, that the need to move away from this silo-based industrial and technological benefit system, which is central to both D&D, selling it to government, to a different understanding how defense industrial and technology development and production has changed over the years. And I always like to point to the F-35 program, and not in terms of where they're going to buy it or not, in terms of the development of consortiums in which everyone commits to be involved. Industry gets involved on the basis of competitiveness and technological abilities. We haven't really moved beyond a model in our minds, which is a model of 20, 50, 100 years ago, to recognize that as a function of the continual exorbitant rising of costs in the R&D world and in the procurement world, that Canada and the United States in particular, because we are integrated, our defense and industrial technology base is integrated with the United States, but we don't seem to recognize it because in part we don't know. The government doesn't know what's going on. But this is now extended to the allies. So if you ask me a grade, I would say we're probably a C plus or a B. But there's lots of opportunities to move forward and get over, and this, as I said again, this I disagree with Dr. Hubert, get over this Canadianization uniqueness thing. We got to stop doing that because there is very little uniqueness in terms of where we reside in the world.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ferguson. I guess I'll ask you clearly. Many witnesses today have, or the witnesses today have made some comment about, we're integrated with the United States, and our defense is their defense is our defense. So if we had a volley of missile attacks, are we going to be as protected as the United States is going to be protecting those missiles coming in, or were they only going to go after protection of the ones that are aimed for the United States, not Canada?
Well, A, the answer is we don't know. B, the legal grounds in the United States, they are not required to defend us. Because of our co-location and our integration with the United States economically and elsewhere, it is in their interest to defend us. But at the end of the day, of the United States, we don't participate, we don't commit, we don't want to invest, and it's sort of a roll of the dice for Canada. And it depends on a variety of strategic scenarios about what such a volley would look like, where it's going, how quickly it can be identified in terms of targets.
So the bottom line is that, sir, we are vulnerable.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Marks.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Well, we'd be vulnerable anyway because those things, their system doesn't work that great either.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, that's highly debatable, Steve.
Yes. Well, and we're not going to have that debate right now. I must say that when I was in university, C plus was one of my better marks. With that, Mr. May, you're going to take it out.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm sure that's not true. I'm sure you did much better in school.
Yeah, I know. Everybody here thinks it's true.
Dr. Seidman, I'm wondering if you can quickly speak to climate change as a factor in continental defense. How are these types of emergencies affecting CAF's ability to defend the continent? And maybe you could propose some solutions or alternatives.
I can do it better on the first than the second. But the reality is that the CAF has spending more of its time dealing with floods, fires, ice storms, pandemics, because climate change is making a dent on our climate. There's no two ways around it. And so that means that the CAF has less money, less time, less resources to deal with other problems. So there's just the time thing about it. It interrupts training cycles, it interrupts other things. And so the CAF is strained. The pandemic has strained the CAF more through the variety of ways in which the CAF has helped the country deal with the pandemic. And so that simply makes it harder to do so. There are others who can talk more clearly about what it means for the permafrost to be softening and how that will make it harder to maintain bases and develop new bases up in the north. But every investment that we put in the north is going to be very, very costly. And climate change is not going to make it cheaper. It's going to make it more imperative because we're going to have to be rescued. We're going to need more assets up in the north because it is going to be a passage that people are going to be going through. So the solution to this, I think the first thing is that we need to tell the military that domestic emergency operations is not just an inconvenience that gets in the way of expeditionary operations, but is a co-priority with these operations in elsewhere. Again, we've faced greater harm from these emergencies than from any foreign aggression in any recent time frame. And so we need to put more effort into it, making this part of their day job and not just something that gets in the way of their day job. So it's about priorities.
Thank you. Now over to, Mr. Ferguson, Dr. Ferguson. How, in your opinion, does cyber capability factor into continental defense?
Well, I think it's vital, and you have to understand. I come from very old school, so I like to keep defense and security as much as possible separate because they overlap too much. But given modern cyber requirements, the digitization of the armed forces, cyber defense is vitally important for the armed forces for their capabilities to do the missions they have to do. The problem becomes if you start to extend that into the security world, the private sector, the policing sector agencies, which now you have a complex number of actors involved with different varying interests. Uh, but certainly that is the number one priority for the defense establishment is protect their own.
And quickly, how do the naval capabilities that Canada is acquiring improve Canada's ability to contribute to continental defense?
The future combatant, surface combatant, I think that's the term they use now, is an important add-on. The problem is that, in my view, that the Royal Canadian Navy wants this capability certainly to modernize, but also to be able to integrate with our allies and, I'll put it this way, sail the seven seas. What the new class of ship, given their capabilities, and depends upon what components, in this term interceptors, they provide a potential significant ability to provide defense against sea launch cruise missiles, potentially in the future sea launch hypersonic missiles coming after North America. And if you go further down the road, which has been tested by the US, by the United States, the potential to provide and also a layer of, at least from sea launch ballistic missiles, a layer of ballistic missile defense. And it all depends on what you buy, but it is a vitally important contribution to North American defense if the Navy doesn't go along to think that it's about going over there, not home. And that's always been a problem for Canada.
Thank you, and thank you to all of our witnesses. I think that's my time, Mr. Chair.
Yes, it's more than your time. But I want to thank our witnesses on behalf of the committee. I want to thank our witnesses who we have had a uniformly excellent presentations over the last few weeks, and you've continued on a fine tradition. So thank you, each one of you. And with that, I'm going to suspend for a minute or two while we re-empanel for the second hour. Thank you again. Professor Kimball and General Seminow. I'm going to ask you to pronounce your name because I'm clearly not pronouncing it correctly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Lieutenant General Semyonov, you have...
Semyon. Okay, thank you, sir.
Cheers.
I think there was a second baseman for the Blue Jays that had that name, but he wasn't a general. So, yeah. Okay, with that, colleagues, I'm going to ask Professor Kimball to give her opening 5-minute statement. Thank you. Except we've lost Professor Kimball.
Okay. Thank you for the honor of this invitation. These past several weeks, as crisis shifted into invasion and now war in Ukraine, ensuring a diversity of voices at these reflections is crucial to ensure different types of expertise inform future policy making. I will now turn to the essentials of this meeting. Canada must maintain multi-domain awareness and response capacities to ensure its sovereignty. In addition, Canada has sunk substantial costs into NORAD and NATO. Defense and cooperative security institutions were tasked with delegated power and the resources to respond to multiple threats. That notwithstanding, NATO promises also require the Canadian government invest in a credible defense. Both of these institutions are good investments and help keep Canada's status as an honest international partner supporting collective defense and security realistic. NORAD ensures Canada has access to all domain warning, command and control on the continent, while NATO gives Canada access to collaborating and communicating regularly with 29 states and global NATO partners. The UN and EU have increasingly delegated crisis management action because NATO is better equipped to do it through the Partnership for Peace and the Centers of Excellence. In fact, the most recent peacekeeping operation sent by the UN dates back to 8 years ago. While undoubtedly there are important threats to Canada from the internal environment, this is the first category I discussed, these include levels of pushback on the masking mandates combined with the roots of populism and anti-liberalism producing what was called by foreign media a siege of Ottawa several weeks ago. A national capital's economic productivity, liberty of circulation, and quality of life was paused with a moderate, coordinated effort and a large colonized power in our country. And that is even though we talked about American support financially, it remains clear that it was Canadians in the streets of Ottawa protesting. We cannot forget these facts. These individuals were motivated by what is going on in Canada less than possibly what is going on in the US, including rumors that it was linked to Trump. One portion of this group's motivation was frustration with the state of the informational environment concerning the pandemic. The asymmetry of information quality and cohesion of policy between the federal and provincial levels in the pandemic has highlighted the importance of transparent and coordination in information government. Violent extremism, racial, gender-motivated violence, and the challenge of adapting to a diverse and respective military culture within CAF are also important readiness and morale. These are internal threats to Canada, requiring consideration. It is worth noting some of the key protesters, organizers of the Ottawa protest are former or actual CAF members. CAF has a history of extremism, suppression. Some of those people have already shifted attention from the pandemic to support Russia against Western sanctions, and an indication that these people will continue to work against Canadian interests. Each of the next threats that I underlined, I have grouped together as critical institutional threats that have critical institutional links to NATO and NORAD. They are ordered so as to reflect threats. Today's threats do not stop at borders and often fail to take a physical shape, as we saw mostly in the Cold War. This complicates deterrence. Finally, the actors engaging in those activities simultaneously work to reduce the chances of credibly attributing anything to a single actor, again, complicating our capacity to respond. Among this, I include hybrid conflict, which adds misinformation and cyber attack, but also includes the use of non-regular actors that we are seeing. These are mercenaries. These are private actors brought into conflict zones. The misinformation, false information is both robot-based, as in AI-based, and includes the use of humans that simply transfer false stories and promote false rumors. Cyber attacks can also target critical infrastructure, banking, retail, or government institutions. We have seen this in NATO partners. In fact, NATO's Cyber Defense Center of Excellence began with 7 members in 2006 and is the most populous today with 28 NATO members. Again, seeing that these states do collaborate, and Canada needs to gain greater access to these environments and bring those resources back home.
Can you finish up in a moment?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Missiles. I saw colleagues had already talked about missiles. These remain a continuing threat. Canada is one foot in, 1 foot out with ballistic missile defense. It's problematic functionally should a territorial missile threat arrive. Research in 2018 talking how NORAD might be used to address Canada's issues concerning strategic defense. I would be happy to share that. The territorial sovereignty in the Arctic was covered by colleagues previously, but I would add a couple things. One, Russia has used the Arctic Council to manage to securitize an institution that explicitly sought to not be brought into the political game. We see this very clearly. Russia is willing to destabilize multiple institutions to achieve gains in Ukraine. And Canadian investments in Arctic sovereignty pale compared to American and U.S. investments. Taken together, Canada has some level of partner support in managing or responding to these threats, but it's simply not doing enough.
Sorry, Professor Kimball,
yes.
We've blown through the 5-minute presentation time.
Thank you.
So I'm sure you'll be able to work it back in with questions. With that, General Seminoff.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for the invitation to address the committee. As the last commander of Canada Command, responsible for Canada's North from a military perspective, my comments today, as I'm sure you're aware, would be focused on the threats to Canada's North. And second, what could the government of Canada do to address those threats? To provide you with some context, I had the privilege of traveling throughout the North over 2.5 years, working closely with the commander of Northern Command, my U.S. counterpart, responsible for the U.S. Arctic, as well as exercising in the North with many different partners. I'm sure the committee has already heard from other witnesses that threat can be determined by 2 factors, which some would say are different sides of the same coin. First, the threat, and second, the capabilities. Together, they come together to determine the level of the threat from low to high. To be fair, it's difficult to find a country that has stated an intent today to challenge Canada's northern sovereignty. But could this change? Yes. Intent to cause harm can change very quickly, which is why examining those nations who have the capability to act, if they decide to do so in the North, could provide the committee with a clearer picture of what the future threat or threats could be to Canada's North. From a vantage point of capabilities, the answer is very clear: the Russian Federation. If the committee has the time, take a close look at what the Russian Federation has accomplished across its North over the last 3 decades. It's not just about defense, which I heard not too long ago. It's also about being prepared for aggression. China, on the other hand, has a capability to act across the Arctic, but it lacks the ability to sustain forces. I would disagree with what I've heard. I believe Russia has the ability to sustain military operations across the high Arctic and subarctic, given what it has built across its northern shore over the past decades. Yes, I know that goes counter to what we're seeing today in Ukraine. However, there's a strong reason to have that conclusion, but this is who we should keep an eye upon. So what could the government of Canada do to be ready for future threats in Canada's North? Again, the answer is up for debate, which I'm sure you've heard, but the fact is that whatever we do will be expensive. You've heard this many times. It's usually as a minimum about 4 times more expensive to build and maintain any infrastructure in the North than it is in the South. But perhaps that's a reason to build our capabilities over the longer period on a multi-year plan. or to develop, put together a strategy to protect Canada's north, something that has been lacking for many years. We need a plan to protect our north. Next, we need to be able to detect threats, air threats, maritime threats, land threats, or a combination of some or all, as you just heard, multi-domain threats. In this respect, the weakness that we have remains in the area of maritime domain awareness, what is going on above and under the waters of Canada's Arctic. Yes, it has improved thanks to technology, but more needs to be done. As well, this capability should be managed by one organization. So on the one hand, when we talk about NORAD modernization, should we also be speaking about perhaps NORAD being responsible for managing maritime threats across Canada's north? There is a strong reason and a strong case to make to do that. And to manage those threats, it has many of the pieces and parts in place already, but clearly it needs a mandate to do that. Finally, detecting threats on the land is difficult, but we have current capabilities that we could use and build on to address that. The Canadian Rangers, I've worked with them in the north, personally on the ground. As a reminder for the discussion, the Canadian Ranger program, there are 5 ranger groups. Its role is to conduct patrols across the north, report unusual activities or sightings, and perform sovereignty or national security duties. As such, I would submit to you we need to first expand the Ranger program to fully cover our north, and next professionalize the program. Yes, the Canadian Rangers do amazing work with what they are given, but the support that they receive in terms of equipment, training, and logistics needs to improve dramatically for the Rangers to be prepared to detect modern land threats across Canada's north. Again, this is the most economical, quickest, and efficient way to establish an on-the-ground northern land surveillance system. In addition, one could also add drones to the entire kind of package. Medium and large drones patrolling across our Arctic with the Rangers and the Canadian Army. It would go very far to increase our ability to detect land threats, approximately 2.6 million square kilometers of Canada's north. Drones of this nature have been used across Canada's north in the past, but they have yet to become part of Canada's regular inventory of its military. Once you detect a threat, one hopefully has a capability to respond to that threat. NORAD modernization in its fullest sense to include new combat aircraft for Canada will meet the need to effectively respond to threats in our northern airspace. Responding to a maritime threat, as you may have just heard, can take many forms, including air power and medium and large drones. But to be able to respond to a maritime incursion across our north with a Canadian warship is more problematic. Why? You need, on the one hand, ice-breaking capability, which rests with the Coast Guard, shipborne weapon systems, which rests with the Royal Canadian Navy. Could we bring these two solitudes together? Arm the Coast Guard, build a ice-breaking capability for the Navy? I leave this for the committee to ponder. Lastly, to respond to the land threat, our military would initially have the Rangers in place, located across Canada's north, supported by drones, but they would need to be augmented by Canadian Army very quickly. The Canadian Army can effectively fight in the north. We've seen that. However, we would need to get military personnel on the ground in the north where needed fast to contain a land threat. The Royal Canadian Air Force has already demonstrated the ability to move military personnel into the north quickly from the west or east of Canada.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm sorry we're going to have to leave it there, but
Okay.
I'm sure you'll work your balance your presentation into the committee. Colleagues, I apologize, and to the witnesses as well. Our technical difficulties continue, and apparently there's no way to resolve them during this meeting. So we will have to stay with it. And I've just asked Professor Kimball to move her microphone up slightly, the movement of the microphone up slightly. That might help with the translators. So with that, we'll turn to our six-minute round. Mr. Doherty, Mr. Spiegelman, Madame Normandin, Madame Atheson. Mr. Doherty.
Lieutenant General, in your highly experienced opinion, should Russian aggression start to extend to NATO partners and friends of Ukraine, would Canada be able to defend itself from a volley of ICBMs? If yes, what does that process look like?
Yeah, the question, it's a great question. The question that was posed to the previous panel, I think the answer is clear. At the end of the day, whether we would be on our own, nobody knows. And that's where I take a slightly different view. I agree more with Dr. Hubert that we need to perhaps start taking a look at us, what we can do, and do our own if needed. Granted, North America, we do work together with the United States. There are a lot of legal authorities that would be required. But at the end of the day, if you take a close look at the agreements, there's no guarantee that the United States of America would defend Canada against any aggression, be it air, ground, land, or sea.
In your opinion, is our Arctic, forward Arctic airfields and their facilities still ready for CF-18s in time of crisis to engage in intercepts of Russian strategic aviation? Yes?
Yeah, great question. As was in the latter part of my presentation, that's something that needs to be looked at because there are not enough, not only when it comes to fighter aircraft, but when it comes to moving personnel into the north, across the north. Yes, you have Resolute, you have Yellowknife, you have Iqaluit, but more needs to be done to have airfields. And when you take a look at the forward operating locations, yes, there are some, but you need more to be able to cover the north effectively.
How do you view the recent fractional orbit bombardment system test by China, and is NORAD prepared to deal with such a threat?
Great question. I don't have the answer to that. I don't have the expertise to answer that question, but I can tell you that I have had the privilege of actually sitting in the answer a number of times watching missile launches out of China. At a certain point, it's determined through physics and trajectory whether or not it is a threat. My understanding is, I believe, in theory, that the United States has the ability to address those threats. In practice, haven't seen it, don't know the answer.
How would you describe the sea-based and subsurface threats to North America posed by Russia and China?
I would classify them as real threats.
How do Russia and China view Canada's Arctic and the Northwest Passage in strategic terms?
Well, if you take a look at China very quickly, the Arctic policy published in 2018 by China, it's proclaimed itself as a near Arctic state, but it's not just China. If you took a look at the Arctic Council comment mentioned by the earlier panel, very true. I actually attended a number of Arctic Council meetings, and the intent was to keep the military out of the Arctic Council. And a lot was done to do that. However, if you look at the composition of the Arctic Council, who is an observer, it's increasing because it's not just China. More and more countries are realizing the importance of the Arctic, be it the Northwest Passage and other areas. And for China and Russia, in my opinion, it is a clear objective to be able to control sometime in the future.
Is NORAD, as it is now configured, prepared to fight a modern war?
Yes, it is.
Is Russian strategic aviation flights and submarine operations back up to the level they were during the Cold War and the approaches to North America?
Not yet, but they will be.
Do you believe that North Korea sees a difference in targeting Canada or the United States?
I have no expertise on that. I don't know. I only watch, as you probably do as well, as in open sources. I'd have to defer to somebody else for a clearer answer to that question.
The recent joint statement between Canada and the United States on NORAD modernization discussed a constellation of sensors from the ocean floor to space. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, and there's a real need for that. And what we did, and if I look back in 2010 and 11, that was a concern. We did a number of trials and tests on having sensors on the ocean floor to know who's in the north. As I'm sure the committee is aware, there are submarines that go through our north. We would call it, part of Canada's waters on a regular basis that we are not aware. We are informed, I think, through partnership, but we really don't know what's going on under the water in Canada's north. So I think it's a step in the right direction.
That recent joint statement also talked about deterring and defeating the new missile threats to North America. What is Canada's role in defeating these new technological threats to North American security?
That I don't know the answer to. You'd have to turn to somebody else for an answer to that question.
How effective are our Victoria-class submarines in defending the Arctic, and what are the limitations and what are the plans to replace them?
Victoria-class submarines are not effective in the Arctic. I don't know how effective they are outside of the Arctic, But at the end of the day, I don't know if the military has a plan. It's always a great debate in the Canadian Armed Forces whether or not we need submarines that can move under the ice, because it brings up this issue of nuclear, which I think frightens a number of people across Canada. Therefore, it needs to be my understanding you need to have nuclear submarines to be able to stay under the ice long enough to do what you do, to be able to counter threats and to guard your sovereignty. But I have not heard of any type of replacement programs for the Victoria-class submarines.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you, Mr. Doherty. Mr. Spankelman, 6 minutes.
Chair, thank you very much, and thank you to our witnesses for being with us this afternoon. I've got 3 categories of questions, and the substance of each of them would very quickly outstrip the time available. So I'm just looking for some guiding thoughts, some opening thoughts for the committee to potentially dive more deeply into any of these 3 areas. My first area, Mr. Chair, is the issue of alliance formation and burden sharing, and Professor Kimball has written extensively on this over the last decade and a half, I believe. So I'm going to ask questions of Professor Kimball to start. Professor Kimball, in light of recent events surrounding Ukraine, the crisis, the military intervention, but also prior to that, what is your view with respect to the political component of alliance formation around NATO? What changes, and if you observe changes in the last few weeks, how radical are they?
Sure. Okay. Well, first off, thank you for the question. Of course, NATO, as I mentioned, is an extremely important commitment that has sunk substantial costs into NATO. Right now, we're hearing all sorts of questions about should we, let Ukraine join NATO? Should Ukraine join the EU? What about, Finland and Sweden? Should they join NATO? And I think one of the things that is clear is that 2% is clearly, it is a political target. 2% does not come from any sort of quantitative analysis. It doesn't come from any sort of strategic analysis or anything like that. And I can say that relatively confidently, because in doing my NATO research, I've actually looked at over 200 pieces of research published on NATO burden sharing, policy papers, books, articles, and all of that. And so that's the first thing that I can say is that 2% is something that politicians created and defense budgets had to very much react to and try to attain afterwards. And then I think there's another thing that we should point out. 2%, as some of my other colleagues have said, it doesn't really say very much about what you're actually doing. One of the things that my burden sharing research is bringing me more towards are other institutions that NATO uses to share the burdens, like the Partnership for Peace. You may recall Canada is actually hosting its first center of excellence in the next several years on climate security in NATO. And so this is one very important way that states share the burden that essentially is not talked about when we look at central budgeting, when we look at civilian budgeting. And also I would add that the idea of expanding the alliance kind of in an overnight type way, we have heard even Zelensky himself talk about. I published research in European Politics and Society in 2020 showing that it is not as easy as simply making a request. It's a process that can take from 10 to 15 years.
I wonder if I could stop you there. Thanks very much for that. That's helpful. My second theme, it's not been broached this afternoon, but obviously people are thinking about it. The state of nuclear disarmament efforts globally, before and now through this crisis. Any thoughts on the status quo? Is it shifting? Could it shift, or is it really more firmly entrenched than ever? And maybe if I can get 30 seconds from you and also from the general on that would be helpful. Thanks.
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing I would point out is that almost all of our strategic arms control and everything like that is basically focused towards Russia. We have the entry of China in the game in a somewhat credible manner. And most of our thinking and our architectural thinking about these risks are essentially just looking at Russia. And so I think, if anything, there needs to be a reflection about how we can bring China into this, how we can, have more transparency. And I would note that in terms of what's going on in the Ukraine, we are seeing there's a use of missiles there in the Ukraine now, and we're seeing that there are issues with them, and this is raising the risks. And I pass it to my colleague.
Thank you very much.
I think when you take a look,
go ahead, General, please.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to invite you to comment for 30 seconds. I do have a third question, time permitting. I'll bring that in as well.
I'll be very quick, and I would throw it to the committee. With what we're seeing in the Ukraine, and I'm Ukrainian, I have friends in the Ukraine right now, but I'm not here to talk about Ukraine. But what we're seeing in the Ukraine is that a failure of detente? It is, I think, is a great question. The short answer is a no, but at the end of the day, we probably could have done a lot more. As we, the Canadian Armed Forces, were focused in the last 15, 20 years on something different, be it Afghanistan. Quickly, our view, our focus changed away, as did many governments, from this nuclear issue, which, to be fair, never really left.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm just going to get General to repeat the last sentence or two. You froze on us.
Yeah, sorry. Is just that one. Over the last number of years, it maybe have the nuclear discussion, the focus, the attention on what could happen around the world from a nuclear perspective, a nuclear arms perspective. We may have lost focus. Yes, we watched what was going on in Northern Korea, but when that all happened, there was a lot more going on that perhaps we didn't pay attention to.
Chair, I've got 30 seconds with your indulgence. Canada's obligations in the area of UN peace operations. Do you see them? How do you see them connected to strategic threat assessments? Are these multilateral obligations that are independent of a threat assessment, or are they directly connected to threat assessments globally?
I'm sure this will be an interesting answer.
I mean, I would say, for at least the last several years, the UN has increasingly delegated to the European Union and to NATO when it comes to those types of activities. If you look at the peacekeeping activities that the UN is currently doing, we're into about a dozen remaining peacekeeping activities. Some of them, of course, are quite dated from the Cold War. The calls in terms of, the blue helmets in Ukraine, I think that is also a fundamental misunderstanding about Russia's role in the UN and how it and China would work together to block any sort of UN action.
Okay, we're going to have to, unfortunately.
I'm on the skeptic side.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Madame Normandine, 6 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup. J'aimerais commencer avec vous, professeur.
Thank you very much. I'd like to start with Professor Kimball. You talked about the role of NORAD and also Canada's role, including the anti-missile shield. And I'd like to hear you more on that because your previous colleagues had differing viewpoints on the structure of NORAD, whether it should be something much more integrated, whether Canada ought to come out of it better in some sense. Well, actually, it's the decision of Canada to decide to what degree they want to participate in the anti-missile shield, considering that in the current situation, with what was done in NORAD in 2004, Canada has a right of consultation, but when it comes to a strong response, it's up to the Americans. And it's similar in Europe because actually the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe controls everything in regard to the response. So we can say that Canada is putting forward a lot of its good faith in the hands of the Americans, and we have to note also that everything that has to do with intercepting ballistic missiles, we're acting on intercepting, sorry for this brief technical interruption, and to see or calculate where they will land. And with the current context in Europe, the geography is so shortened that the response time, we're ending up in 2 minutes, with 2 minutes of response time. So we ought to ask ourselves the question, in 2 minutes, do we have the capacity to transmit the information, make a clear decision, and still have a discussion with Washington, between Washington and Ottawa? I think that we're in a world that is very idealistic. Thank you very much. And precisely on the challenge of what is hypersonic, we know that we have to intervene in detection, in deterrence and defense. What should we emphasize in a rapidly moving context? Of course, detection is the first thing. NORAD already has that mandate or task to handle. And in part, Canada will be better protected if we invest more in certain facets in NORAD. for on the territorial mobile. In the current situation, what Canada obtains is out of date. It's equipment that is outdated, that is already, in fact, after the number of years of service for which it was planned. So we have to ensure that if Canada wanted to contribute and continue to be a substantial partner in NORAD, Canada would have to make additional efforts in investment. And I know that this is difficult for Canadians, but I think in the 2020s we ought to have a more in-depth reflection on the reliability of American promises. We've gone through the Trump period, and once again, I think that this emphasizes the idea that, as I often say, Canada benefited from the fact that the U.S. almost elected someone who was, well, with Trump, we saw what type of thing can happen with an American leader who, sorry, there's a brief technical interruption, with Democratic allies.
Time where Canada's geography was an element of its defense. Because we were so far away from everything, it really didn't matter. Ça a changé. Ça, c'est la chose qui...
That has changed. That is the thing that has changed. This brings me to the next question I would like to ask both of you. General, you talked about the importance of occupying the territory and of military staff on the ground in order to counter a threat. And we've heard a lot about sovereignty for Canada in the Arctic as well. I'd like to hear you on whether this statement of affirming Canadian sovereignty in the Arctic should be done by taking a political position, first of all, or by an actual occupation of the sites that show that we actually have a presence on the territory. Do they go hand in hand? Should it be done separately, or in what order? I'd like to hear you on that.
Begin.
Well, we have, it is quite an important aspect considering the staff in the Arctic, the cost of it, and there is certainly a will to value the people that live in that environment who are capable of providing information, and we have certain possibilities that are there, but also there's the question of deterrence. Does deterrence rely on having soldiers on the ground, or can we deter based on other aspects, our systems, our drones, or other things? What we're hearing is that conventional protection of the Arctic is very costly, so we have to consider things as to how we defend it. Are there other means to defend it? So that is the question that we ask, because you're the ones who have access to the information. But at least I think that, yes, we can have more troops, but there's a limit to the efficiency. It's costly. But what's important?
We had an exercise in 2011 in and across the Arctic, done very quietly, a map exercise, that a northern country sent a number of scientists onto Canadian territory to do some type of testing. Then what is the response? The response from the other country was, because we were then going to move CBSA, RCMP officers in place to move them off of Canada's terrain, then the response was they ended up sending military forces over to guard their scientists. What did we do? We then had to respond. So at the end of the day, I agree with my colleague, but to be able to maintain and hold territory, someone has to be standing on it. It can't be held by a drone, by an aircraft, by a ship. An individual has to stand on a piece of ground, and you have to move them off that piece of ground to take control. Then the question is, how do you do that across our Arctic?
Madam Matheson, 6 minutes, please.
So often I end up, in terms of like continuing the conversation from Madame Norman, then. So I think this is the same line of questioning. General, you had then spoken about those people on the ground. In terms of that military personnel, can you expand in terms of those numbers? And then, of course, could you? There are several recommendations that we're looking for in terms of this report. We've heard often about those infrastructural deficits that exist in the Arctic. It's not just on base, of course, but we're talking about housing. We're talking about the resources to feed, to provide fresh water. Sadly, not to those maybe who live there, but military personnel. And all of the impacts of that, what is required to sustain that kind of action of which you're speaking?
Yeah, no, agreed. And as part of my presentation, that was the last component of it. And that was one, what you have in the North, you have reservists in the North already, but not enough. You have some in Yellowknife, Whitehorse, and in Iqaluit. What I was going to say in the first 5 minutes was that one, expanding the reserves across the North would be a thing you could do for the here and now. Cost you far from what you would if you had put regular military. It could meet your threat now, but expand the number of reservists across the North to form some type of organization, some type of battalion. And then following on a question that you posed to the previous group, I'll give you a great answer. And that is, take that organization and give it a full Northern identity. Currently, that organization is part of the Loyal Edmonton Regiment, but why not take that group, organize it into 600, 200 in Whitehorse, 200 in Yellowknife, 400 in Iqaluit, and form them into a Northern organization that has a Northern Indigenous people's identity. I think that would address a number of issues, but it would also immediately address the need to have people on the ground to be able to address any land threat, because you'd also have an expanded ranger program, rangers, expanded reserves, and then the ability to get. I don't know if that answers your question.
It certainly starts to. So you're advocating for, again, there's that difference between Indigenous partnerships versus Indigenous-led. Are you advocating more for that Indigenous-led side? And then what would you advocate, or what would you propose for what that might look like?
Yeah, my responses are about the here and now. You know, what could you do now that is cost effective, that can be done quickly? And I would say, one, establish an organization in the North. Yes, it would be Indigenous led, but if you're part of the Canadian Army, you're part of the Canadian Army. They wouldn't be separate. They'd fight as part of the Canadian Army if needed across the North. So there is an identity. There's a leadership at a certain level, but it would kind of be, at the end of the day, part of the Canadian Army working with the Rangers, which need to be expanded across the North, and to increase the training equipment and logistic support to them. By having those two components on the ground, there is partnership and there's an element of leadership, but clearly it's all part of one package. As mentioned by the previous group, very important is that it is a challenge across government, because any threat in the North would additionally have to be dealt with by the RCMP, by CBSA, by the Coast Guard, and by the Canadian Armed Forces. How do they all legally come together to be able to achieve an objective? Not very easy.
Okay. If I might add,
go ahead.
I was just wanted to add, I mean, Canada has a really unique opportunity with, it's going to be founding, NATO's 28th Center of Excellence on Climate Security. There still needs to be a look. Going to be a brick and mortar asset. Canada has a role in terms of, determining what voices will be at that center. We've talked a lot about Indigenous peoples. Right now is an opportunity Canada can plan for and profit from in some senses. There is kind of a temporary opportunity that's a little bit of a golden hour. Canada has announced to NATO this is supposed to be on the ground running in 2024. So again, I think it's about thinking a little bit outside the box.
And finally, to both of you, I guess it is a furtherance of this, but it talks about that infrastructure. I mean, certainly high-speed internet, and Dr. Kimball, you were talking about even just drones and the operation of those drones. I mean, what kind of expenditures are we looking at in terms of just setting those sorts of infrastructure programs up?
Yeah, if I can quickly address that. First, it's going to be very, very expensive. I think Dr. Kimball would tell you that as well. This is not cheap. Therefore, when you take a look at what can we do with the public purse, given that healthcare, education are all probably just as important, if not more, as I said, it's something that's have to be built over a number of years, but built based on a foundation, on a plan. Without a plan, we keep adding little band-aids, pieces here, pieces there. Develop a plan, develop a strategy for protecting Canada's North. That might take 5, 10, 15 years. You'll have something to start with. Over to my colleague.
Briefly, please.
I mean, I agree. The cost is going to be quite large. I mean, as I said, comparatively, Canada has invested way less than the US and way less than Russia and even some other states like Sweden and Finland in the Arctic. And I think it has a little bit, but a lot to do with political machinations about what goes on bipartisan wise in Ottawa. I try to stay out of that because my job is being a scholar, not getting into politics that much. But again, I think it needs to be something that all parties need to, align themselves on and say, this is a priority because we think Canadian territorial defense matters.
Ms. Matson, colleagues, we're down to the second round dilemma once again. If I go to 5:45, it's a little less than 20 minutes, so I think we're going to go down to 3 minutes, 3 minutes, 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute, 3 minutes, 3 minutes. So, Ms. Gallant, 3 minutes.
General Semiano, as you know, the Canadian Forces' greatest strength is in its people. So in your capacity as the former commander of military personnel, I ask these first two questions. When COVID hit, CAF recruits in basic training were isolated in their rooms for the rest of the program. Some were teenagers away from home for the first time. Essentially, they were in solitary confinement. Meals were left outside their doors, no human contact. At least one committed suicide. Since proficiencies were not achieved by the deadlines, the ones who didn't quit on their own were released. Now, having been commander of military personnel, what recommendations would you make to improve retention should a similar situation arise in the future?
Yeah, one great question. As you all know, retention, as you've heard, is probably the more difficult piece at times than recruiting. On the retention side, I think it comes to communicate to the men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces why you were doing what you're doing, vice just doing that. I know that sounds unmilitary-like at times, but clearly something we found over the last couple of decades is there is more need to communicate. So the men and women that safeguard this nation clearly understand, why they had to stay in their rooms, why they had to do this or do that, which was a directive from the Chief of Defense Staff. Clearly, when you look at it, I don't think any of us were as prepared as we should have been for COVID. It did take time. So, Mr. Chair, just to give you a little bit more, I actually work with Canadian Armed Forces personnel who were in the cyber program. So I have a lot of knowledge on that piece. And I watched them go through trying to learn, to train on cyber. These are brand new recruits. And none of us were prepared for changing what we normally did, because in the military, it was always about face-to-face training, being in a training schoolhouse. So to answer the question, difficult. To be fair, I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't prepared for it, which I'm sure none of us did we're ready really for COVID. I don't know if that answered your question.
Okay, so do we now have a constellation, General Semiano, with our European counterparts of satellites from the most western part of the Northwest Passage all the way through to Europe? Does that exist yet?
Remember, when it comes to satellites, if you ask the question from a satellite perspective, do we own those satellites or are we renting time for those satellites? And the short answer, from my understanding, is no, we don't. We get time. We get the information that we need when we think we need it.
We'll have to leave it.
Yeah, I mean, my colleague is correct. Most of the information comes from our partnerships that already exist, that are strong, like Five Eyes. Also notable, we talked a little bit about the Arctic, and I think one of the things that we don't really talk about very much is how states have actually managed to get information off of the Arctic through using scientists one way or another. And I can tell you an interesting story about underwater microphones meant to listen to whales that actually listened to submarines that were placed by the French in a
We're going to have
scientific
to
agreement.
hold that story about underwater whales and microphones, unfortunately. Madame O'Connell, 3 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here. Professor Kimball, I know you've written about military procurement, and then in your opening remarks, you also spoke about the changing nature of the needs and the capabilities, and you spoke about misinformation, hybrid attacks. So tying that into procurement as well, what do you see are some of the priorities from a procurement perspective, taking into account this kind of what, I think this new age or the future of threats in Canada?
I mean, absolutely. Canada needs to invest in the informational awareness domain. This is a set of things. I know we say this as if it's something easy, but it does require investing in communicating more clearly with partners and investing in equipment and investing more in institutions. So I think one of the things Canada is placed to be able to have access to more, but I think that it just doesn't do well enough. And, making sure it gets access to information and kind of, pushing in certain cases. But I think at the end of the day, the most that it can do is invest in its people, in its talent. I think we need to convince the next generation of young Canadians to join military forces, to become interested in these issues, because, we're seeing other countries recruiting with conscription, literally, and here we have a problem just recruiting to get people into our forces. And as we know, one of the strengths of Canada's forces is literally the diversity of the people that it can put in the field. And I would close by saying one of the things Canada does very well that it doesn't really want to recognize, but all NATO partners recognize, is Canada is an expert in languages. It is the only partner of NATO that has 2 official languages, and Canada leads the most languages in its battalion right now. And so literally Canada is leading the most new partners, managing the most languages, and doing this quite well next to much more powerful, much more endowed states, and accomplishing the same task as partners in Poland and other Baltic states. And so I think that this shows that there's something that Canada adds that's not like the other partners, and that, maybe we need to get over the federal political disagreements and just realize this is a force of Canada and we need to go with it.
But clearly the number one investment needs to be people. How many years does it take to have a sergeant with 20 years of experience? 20 years. I can always buy equipment off the shelf. People needs to be the number one priority.
Thank you. I'm out.
Yeah, 10 seconds.
Okay.
1 minute, Madame Normandin.
C'est très, très rapide.
Very briefly, I just want to know, considering global warming and the melting of ice in the north, that it can become more and more attractive for the U.S. to not recognize Canadian Arctic sovereignty. Can we hope, in spite of everything, that Canada will maintain it one way or the other, this sovereignty, considering its low level investment in NORAD and continental investment? You have to know that the current status between Canada and the U.S. goes back to a letters exchanged in the 70s. And it has to do with recognition. We agree not to agree, but we are not moving forward on the issue. We need to persuade the Americans that there is a need to change that agreement, because from the viewpoint of the Americans, it's of great benefit to them, actually. The interpreter regrets this brief technical interruption. We're in good faith.
Madame Nathan, 1 minute.
In both panels, we heard about the problems in terms of all the things that are being, or all the different departments that are involved in terms of, especially around Arctic sovereignty. So Canada Border Services, D&D itself, search and rescue with fisheries, and all of the different silos. How can we break down those silos to have a more of a coordinated response in regard to our Arctic? Just maybe one, I guess, major recommendation from both witnesses?
Put somebody in charge. Short answer, me. That's the dilemma when all the partners come to the table. I've been there. I co-chaired the Government of Canada's Emergency Preparedness Committee with at least 30 or 40 different partners. And at the end of the day, when no one's in charge, committees don't end up kind of doing what you need them to do. You need someone, a department, to be told you are the lead department. And this has happened in government over the last many years. You are the lead department in this respect. And it's a little bit more complex because in the North, it's not all about defense. It's not about militarizing the North. It's about the military in the North. But when it comes to a particular issue, challenge, threat, a department needs to be put in the lead by the Government of Canada.
Thank you, Madame Masson. Somehow or another, I think, General, someone's behind you and about to yank your chain to see who's in charge here. Yeah,
I think it's my cat.
Yeah, it's your cat.
She wants to be fed, Mr. Chair C+.
So we're going to put a cat in charge of Northern Command. Okay. Well, Ms. Lambropoulos will probably fight you for that. Ms. Carolyn Finley, 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's very interesting, General, what you said, and as clearly as I've heard it stated here, that Canada's geographical remoteness, which at one time provided a kind of understood barrier, it isn't an issue anymore. This is not about our remoteness anymore. So I thank you for that. And also, you're reminding me of the phrase we've heard, if you don't use it, you lose it when it comes to the North. And you've talked about our Ranger program, which when I was Associate Minister, it was emphasized to me how unique this Ranger program is in the world and how it gives us a distinct advantage of eyes and ears on the ground that is not seen elsewhere. So I would just like to hear a little more from you on expanding and professionalizing it, supporting their training, and the need to rearm them with new small arms as well.
Yeah, one, if you were to take a look at the Arctic Council and what other countries have vis-a-vis Ranger type organizations, we are the one, if the only one, that has that type of organization that we've given that responsibility to, and that's helping to safeguard our North. So clearly, it needs to be done. So on the one hand, there are 5 Ranger patrols located across the Arctic, subarctic, and Canada's north. They are organized geographically by province. There's about 60,000, in accordance to the Canadian Armed Forces site, Rangers who are part of the program, broken down into many, many different patrols. But clearly, they don't cover the entire North. Why don't they cover the North? Part of it is organizational. Part of it, too, is a recruiting piece. If you take a look at what a Ranger is provided, and they do this, I can tell you, having worked with this, out of the goodness, out of being great Canadians, not about getting paid, not about an employee-employer relationship, the little that we provide them, I'm always amazed by what a great work that they do for us. So what could you do? One, you could expand the program by ensuring there's enough patrols that cover our North, that exercise throughout the North on a more regular basis that we do, so you could have more of them. You could provide more training. Yes, they are part of the Canadian Armed Forces, but if you were to ask anybody from the Canadian Armed Forces as a witness, are they provided with the same benefits, training, support that someone in uniform is provided? The answer is no. Then my question would be, why not? Given what you ask these good people to do, shouldn't they be provided that? So you could be then asked, what about more training? What about more equipment? My last understanding was they were provided with an annual kind of allowance for the use of their snowmobile with some gas. So there's a lot that could be done here to professionalize and to expand the program. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that's very helpful. I think if we've learned anything from Ukraine, it's about pride, and I know they take great pride in their positions. Thank you.
And I would tell you very quickly, every submarine that we noted in Canada's north, or a whale, because they both have the same type of movement in the water, it's a fact, was spotted by a Ranger, not by a regular force military personnel or drone or whatever. They have real value.
Submarines, whales, or cats?
Okay. All of them.
All of them, yes. We'll have a cat patrol. Mr. Fisher, do you have an opinion on cat patrols in the north?
How much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
Not very long. 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay, thank you. My question is going to be for Professor Kimball, but I do want to say a quick hello to General Semianu, and thank you for your service, but also the amazing work you did after what you would probably not call retirement. So thank you, and that goes for the work that you did in my community as well, so thank you for that. Professor Kimball, I asked this question in the last panel, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this. What's the most important investment that we could make today to prepare for not only the future, but for today's threats?
And I think the most important investment we need to make today is we need to invest more in our people. We need to invest more in our soldiers. We need to invest more in reaffirming the morale among our troops. Whenever I meet folks in uniform, I'm continually impressed by how excited they are, how much they share a willingness to represent Canada on missions. I had the opportunity to host University Defense last week, and we had over 100 people in uniform talking with academics and students. And I think that this is really where we need to be going. We need to be having more events like this where we can talk openly and we can really try to create that synergy so that there is no longer a silo between kind of the policymakers, the military folks, and scholars, because we all have things to share. And I think really, as General Semianu said, that, training the future and creating those troops for the future is a time investment, and it's a thing we can do today. And then the other aspect is the money part. We need to have better equipment in our zone around us.
I guess I have time then for a quick question then for the General. General, ballistic missile program, is it time to reevaluate and go?
Yes, it is. Given the importance of what's going on vis-a-vis China, I've seen it myself sitting in the NORAD headquarters, and that was 12 years ago. Even at that time, I would have said yes. And the short answer is yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. And again, on behalf of the committee, I want to thank both of you for your excellent presentations. We have had uniformly excellent presentations, and it's been very helpful to the committee. It's interesting how over time and over these various presentations there starts to be sort of consensus points, and the two of you have brought forward some of those consensus points. So again, thank you. With that, colleagues, we'll adjourn to Wednesday. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.